So there is the big five definition of extroversion, which includes things like activity, assertiveness, excitement seeking, gregariousness, positive emotions, and warmth. But in this video, I'm talking about the social extroversion, so the most common definition of it. But first, this video is sponsored by Boo, a social app where you can make friends and date by personality. If you want to interact smoothly and charmingly with people, you can get some in-depth, wingman-esque flirting tips and insightful personality analysis using the telepathy feature. And if you want Reddit, except purely focused on personality types, you can enjoy the social feed. On Boo, you needn't be limited by borders or languages. The alternate dimensions feature allows you to communicate and meet different personality types in different countries and different languages. Sign up using the link below in the description of the video. Like many content creators, let me abruptly jump to the far right to see who is the most extroverted type. I'm going to put Esfjs here. It's always tricky because this is also the stereotype of them, and Esfjs love their solitude and have their introverted moments as well. So why do I think they are the most extroverted type? They are Fe dominant types, so they're focused on people by default. Relationships in some form or another will be their lifeblood. It makes sense. If you have the ability to be socially masterful and navigate that realm with grace, charm, and wit, as they do, then why not lean into it? It is a disproportionately powerful skill to possess in life and wield. Their top three functions are Fe, Si, and Ne. Their Ne, with its creativity, inventiveness, and originality, combines perfectly with their dominant Fe to create someone who's polished and a dexterous communicator. I associate Si with consistency, habit, and routine. So Esfjs are going to make people a habit in their life. This lines up with exactly what I've seen in practice from Esfjs as well. They are social schedulers. I have, on occasion, shuddered when seeing the calendars of Esfjs and the sheer amount of meetups they have booked in. Okay, let's jump to the opposite end. For the most introverted type, I'm going to put INTJs. Initially, just out of gut instinct, I thought maybe INTPs would be the most introverted, because their opposite type is at the opposite end. But I think that INTJs belong there instead. Being Ni dominant types means that they can derive endless value from being in their heads. What does being in your head actually mean? It's not needing external stimuli or to be doing something in order to be enjoying yourself. Obviously, in the modern age, we're constantly having some kind of input from content. Even the most introverted people are listening to podcasts or videos constantly, and so on. In fact, that might be their refuge. But that notwithstanding, INTJs are capable of being exceptionally inwardly focused and can derive, seemingly, endless enjoyment, ideas, and insights from doing so. INTJs have Fe as their blind spot, meaning it's not valued, they don't use it that much, and in some sense they don't respect it either. This results in two things. A, they don't need people that much and are happy spending time alone, and B, they can become isolated because of it. Typically, INTJs will have at most a really close social circle. Even when they have a much broader network, those people tend to be, well, I guess disposable might be the word, or perhaps functional and useful to them. I think that the evil lair stereotype has some legitimacy to it. Okay, let's put a type in the middle somewhere. Okay, I'm going to put Isfjs here. Isfjs are a surprisingly versatile type, something which is overlooked about them. In my anecdotal experience, Isfjs seem equally comfortable on their own, as well as with people. Their own company is never going to bore them, but being in contact with people regularly seems enjoyable too. I think their tolerance for socializing comes down to the approach they take. They will often ask questions to get the other person talking, and will put the spotlight on others. They can conserve their energy by being in listening mode, so they don't overexert themselves socially. Should they wish, they can be ultra talkative. Other times, they can fade into the background and just observe people. Like with many introverted types, the function that the outside world is going to see most prominently from them is their highest extroverted function, in this case Fe. So it can make them come across as quite social. I think Isfjs belong in that ambiverted category. Okay, let's do Enfjs. I think they belong here. So they're close to Esfjs, but not quite as extroverted as them. Enfjs are Fe doms. Also, they have Se as a third function, which is extroverted in the big five sense of the phrase. It's outwardly focused and quite aggressive towards the world. The reason I put Enfjs behind Esfjs is because of their Ni. Let me describe it in a weird way. Let's say that both types were in an introverted mood. Enfjs would look a bit like Infjs, and Esfjs might resemble Isfjs. Isfjs are still quite an ambiverted type, in my view, whereas Infjs might be less so. So Enfjs have the ability to go very introverted when they're in certain mental states, whereas Esfjs are more likely to retain some kind of extroverted vibe most of the time. So I'll carry on this side of the line. I think I'll put ESTPs next. It's tricky choosing between ESTPs and ESFPs for this place on the line. I think it's simply because people I've known of these two types really do have their introverted moments. ESTPs are of course extroverts, but their top function of SE isn't necessarily socially extroverted. It's outwardly and externally focused, and SE DOMs approach the world aggressively instead of being insular and withdrawn, but it's when you factor in their FE that gives them a much more socially extroverted vibe. ESTPs seek out stimulation. They have a lust for energizing situations. They want to have fun and excitement in some form. And simply, people are an excellent source of all of those things, either directly, but definitely as companions. So people can tick their boxes and they're drawn to them for one reason or another. Even if it's not specifically because they want to be social, people are still excellent conduits for fun, excitement, and adventure. Let's put ESFPs next. ESFPs are drawn to people for many of the same reasons as ESTPs. I think there's more variability with ESFPs in this area though. They can be far more relationship focused than ESTPs, but also more independent and individualistic at times as well, wanting to retreat from groups that they don't gel with or mesh with. ESFPs are certainly one of the most active types, with SE and TE in their top 3 functions. They're also going to have a strong focus on people, relationships, and just connecting with and experiencing others. So they're capable of being way more extroverted than ESTPs, but also way less as well. So I think that balances out a bit. I'm going to put ESTJs next. Choosing between ESTJs and ENTJs for this slot is a bit tricky. I would say that ESTJs are the most active type, the most on the go and action oriented, although that action tends to manifest itself as getting things done. On the Big 5 definition of the trait extroversion, ESTJs would rank very highly, I imagine. They're constantly attacking the outside world in an aggressive way. They're a go-getting type, even if they might not always be described that way. ESTJs can be witty and interpersonally charismatic. They care deeply about their relationships and bonds, and will invest a great amount of effort and time into them. Like any type, they can be drained by socializing, but it's not a common thing for them to feel. But at the same time, they're not going to seek out more and more relationships and connections just for the fun of it. So they're kind of like mid-range extroverts. Okay, let's do ENTPs next. ENTPs have a bit of duality when it comes to social extroversion. They're capable of periods of intense and sustained social contact when they're in fun, networking, adventure, or just party mode. However, there is the other side of them as well that's more intellectual, academic, introspective, and in that mold of the lone figure, experimenting, analysing, and studying the topics or hobbies or interests they have. They can become extremely absorbed and wrapped up in their individual pursuits. So ENTPs very much fluctuate between these two modes, in my experience. So I think they balance out being quite ambiverted. I think that many ENTPs mistype as INTPs initially, because they might not see themselves as extroverts in the conventional sense. I think ENTPs find people interesting, but don't necessarily need them. Because of their potential to be highly social, I don't think that they're right on the ambiverted line, but they're fairly close. Okay, let's do ENFPs next. I think that I agree with what people often say about ENFPs, that they can be very socially introverted, despite technically being an extroverted type. It's not obvious why this would be the case though, but I can speculate. Intuitive dominant types tend to view the world in quite an abstract way. It's quite hard to describe in tangible terms, precisely for that reason. So with ENFPs, you have an intuitive function, followed by FI, which is inwardly focused. Then, they have TE, which I associate with being extremely action-oriented. So ENFPs have a lot of energy and movement to them. They're expansive people, but it's not always going to be directed towards social things. ENFPs can be highly extroverted when they're in the right mood or frame of mind, but I think they belong firmly in the ambiverted category. Okay, INFJs. INFJs take a very similar approach to ISFJs in social settings. However, I do think that INFJs get drained way more easily than ISFJs. Also, their social extroversion is more forced. One-on-one, INFJs can be quite masterful, but then again, one-on-one interactions, I think can still be considered introverted interactions, depending on your relationship with a person. As time goes on, they develop strategies to interact better with people, basing these strategies on patterns they've observed, and just their psychological insight into people. One of the reasons that INFJs are confusing, and even contradictory at times, is that they're people-focused types, and fascinated by psychology, but not always particularly social. So they're definitely more extroverted than most introverted types, but sometimes it's an artificial kind of extroversion that they can summon up, and it does run out quickly. So when their social battery is running out, they can sometimes feel like Cinderella's approaching midnight. Okay, let's do ENTJs. ENTJs are a bit like ENTPs when it comes to social extroversion. I think that many ENTJs mistype as INTJs initially, precisely because they don't match this stereotype of being larger-than-life personalities. They can be withdrawn, quiet, shy, academic, and intellectual. Then there is the other side of them, which is more, as the stereotype says, commanding, forceful, and intense. Again, they're a type who would be very extroverted by the Big Five definition of it, but not necessarily as much when it comes to social extroversion. As time goes on and they connect and collaborate with more people, ENTJs will inevitably broaden their social circle and might appear to be, or actually become more, socially extroverted. Okay, let's do Isfps. Many Isfps will relate to being highly introverted, but in this video, we're ranking the types, or assessing them, relatively to each other. Based on that, Isfps have a few things that make them more extroverted, on average, than the types below them on this line. Types tend to be good at both versions of their dominant function. In this case, that means that Isfps, who are Fi dominant types, are also quite good at Fe when they want to be. It's not a massive strength in the same way, but they can dip into that mode if they want to. Or perhaps rather, their Fi can come across as Fe-like at times. This is one of the reasons why Fe being described as empathetic and Fi not being described that way doesn't make that much sense. It's like two different versions or flavors of the same thing. So as much as Fi is individualistic, independent, and therefore can pull away from people, it's also excellent at connecting with people on a deeper level. Also, Isfps have Se as their second function, so they will want to seek out new experiences often. And as I've mentioned before, people are excellent facilitators of that. Okay, INFPs. Lots of the same reason as ISFPs, to explain why the Fi of INFPs can be excellent when it comes to people. They might not have the preference for constantly connecting with people. Instead, they're more preoccupied with their own identity and values and figuring out their place in the world. INFPs are an intuitive type. However, ISFPs are actually very intuitive as well, so there isn't a big difference there. What causes the big difference is that INFPs have a higher intuitive function and have SE as a blind spot function. So they're much more out of touch with the external world, their bodies, the environment, and they're less outwardly focused with their energy. Rather than seeking out new people endlessly, they might be more inclined to stick with close relationships that they already have. Let's do ISTJs. ISTJs have a somewhat ambiverted vibe to them. Just like the ISFJs, I think that their routines in life will mean they come into constant and regular contact with people, so that keeps them in touch with the social side of life. There is a member of my extended family who I believe to be an ISTJ. He is excellent in company, a great storyteller. In the moment, he seems very extroverted, but after quite a short period of time, he'll spring to his feet and say, right, we're off, got stuff to do. It's these short, sweet, and well-scheduled bursts of social interaction, but rarely lingering for too long. He is of an older generation, so perhaps ISTJs these days are way more introverted, but that's entirely possible. But for now, I think they're not too low down on this list. They are a concrete and grounded type, generally speaking, so they might be less prone to unorthodox and unconventional lifestyles that involve intense isolation. Okay, INTPs. INTPs were a contender for being last on the list. There isn't much insight I can add here that people don't already know about them. I will say that, if anything, they struggle less socially than descriptions would have you think. But they're still not massively socially inclined. It's not just that, it's the amount of alone time that they're able to tolerate, which is a lot. Also, if the INTP in question is able to, well, feed themselves, then they really can go into the introverted tank for long periods of time. They're a thinking dominant type who repress their feeling function and are not the most inclined to take action and push the boat out in terms of constantly seeking new experiences. These factors can combine to make a pretty introverted type, especially when you consider that they are creatures of habit to a large degree as well. So I'll put them here. Okay, finally, ISTPs. They were a tricky one to place on this continuum. In my experience of them, they don't particularly come across as introverts in their vibe, but when I observe how much time they're willing to, and decide to, spend alone, they very much are introverted. The functions of ISTPs can make them introverted to begin with, having inferior Fe, so sometimes struggling with navigating relationships, having Ti, Se, and Ni in a row above that, none of which are particularly socially extroverted. I think more than this though. When I imagine ISTPs being in their element, it usually involves some kind of solo pursuit. They tend to be lifelong learners, people who master skills, and these things necessitate large amounts of solitude, so being alone is a natural part of their lifestyle. Let me know how you would rank these types down below.